I'm sorry I am late with these reviews, but I was gone at Tri-Cities International Film Festival for the past weekend and I couldn't really get to any recording devices, so here we go. Goosebumps has been a cultural phenomenon for the better part of 30 years. Dozens of books that were popular enough to grab a TV show that a lot of people became nostalgic for today. In 2015, Sony released the original to a general okay from critics and audiences. I too felt that the original is a good Halloween film for families, and I have enjoyed it more and more with each passing screening. The same couldn't really be said for the sequel. I was kind of anticipating this film because I thought that a Goosebumps series could be fun to watch every time it came around. Think of it as the family version of Saw. But if the product is going to be like this, then I don't know how they are going to maintain quality. The film is about two friends who go to a house on a junk job and find a book that releases Slappy the Dummy. He starts to wreak havoc on their town and must find a way to stop the ventriloquist dummy. Everything I just said is mostly the first movie but rushed in paste. This film feels like the product of impatient producers that wanted to make their kids a film in time for Halloween. This doesn't mean that it is bad in any way, it's just okay to watch, and you can have a good time watching it. Jack Black, for what little we get of him, is a pleasant sight to see, and his story ends in a very interesting way that I hope can be expanded upon in a third film if possible. For the most part, just like the original, the tone and style is like a typical Goosebumps episode. For the most part. I'd say the worst thing I could say about this film is that most of it is forgettable, which is odd to say considering the books and even the extent the original film and the television shows had some memorable moments and even some memorable endings. Goosebumps 2 is just fine. It's inoffensive, it's dumb fun, that it's just okay to watch. But it could have stood for a much bigger budget than $35 million. Goosebumps 2 gets a C. Damien Chazelle is an interesting director. He isn't my favorite director working today, but his track record is recognizable and awesome. His first film is easily the best film out of the gate, which was Whiplash. Then his follow-up was La La Land, which we all know how that turned out at the Oscars. Now with his third film, First Man sees the return of Ryan Gosling as he plays the most important figure in space exploration, Neil Armstrong. But before we get into the actual review, I feel I must preface some things. Before the wide release of this film at Toronto International Film Festival, a journalist spilled the beans that the film didn't show Armstrong hoisting the American flag on the moon. This naturally led some people to proclaim that Damien Chazelle was a, quote, anti-American, revisionist, liberal, and a liberal machine of Hollywood. Having seen the film, this whole controversy was a fucking waste of time. This whole film is nothing but an American love fest. It's not like they changed history and said that the Soviets made it to the moon. In fact, when it came to the space race, they portrayed it with near accuracy, with Americans really gunning for the program while also facing opposition from both the USSR and a public who some thought that as the program went on, that the program was a waste of money. The American flag is plastered everywhere, and if you really wanted the flag on the moon, there is a shot of the flag on the moon next to the lunar module later on. But I am also here to tell you that while the mission may have been the most important aspect for most Americans, often we forget that the people who made this actually faced a lot of dangers. That last line is very odd to say because everyone knows who Neil was and what he did for mankind in the space race, but what Chazelle aimed to do with this movie was not tell the story about the mission, but actually the character of Neil Armstrong, the struggles his family as well as himself went through during one of the most dangerous times of the space program. That isn't to say that the film is blind to the conflicts that were outside of his personal life. You still get the space race and every historical intricacy that they could shove in there. One of the coolest things about the film is the cinematography. Is there shaky cam? Yes, but only in areas it needs to. There are times when the camera will allow the viewer a very claustrophobic look inside the rocket capsule that makes you feel like you are there. There was even one point in the film where I thought to myself, could you imagine what it would have been like to really be in that situation? That's how good the cinematography really is. The visuals even go as far as to look like a documentary made in the 1960s, with title cards to match. As usual, the acting is good, with the best coming from Claire Foy. As for Gosling, I felt he needed to emote a little bit more in certain scenes, especially after something very traumatic happens to him in the middle of the film. Like all of Chazelle's films, music plays a big part of the film, but I felt it was a bit subdued, which is much appreciated. You'll see it when you see it. As for the flaws, the pace is overly slow, which can lead to a very boring narrative for some. The film is 2 hours and 15 minutes long, but felt like 3.5. I've already mentioned Gosling as another downside. First Man isn't my new favorite Chazelle film, but it isn't bad. It has plenty of good marks in favor of it. I recommend the film, even with the pacing issues. If you are a fan of space exploration or Damien Chazelle, First Man is definitely your movie this weekend. First Man gets a B-. This was easily my most anticipated film of the weekend. It was a continued career move of Cabin in the Woods writer and director Drew Goddard, and the trailer showed me a good time at that bi-state hotel. What did I get overall? A pretty damn fun film. The film felt like a callback to classic thriller mysteries from Agatha Christie, but paired with 70s era set design and kind of Drew Goddard's own take on the Quentin Tarantino formula. The film follows a group of people with individual backstories at the El Royale, a hotel with a deep history of its own, when in one night a whole lot of bad coincidences happen and a group learns more about each other. There's murder, mystery, chaos, and it all comes together in one location. This is the best film of the weekend. The narrative is woven so well, the acting is superb from all of the cast, the twists it takes, while some are very predictable, do make sense and work effectively in the story. The set design is absolutely great, and the use of color and lighting is used exquisitely. The music choices are superb, and the acting from all of the cast is well performed. Every character has a clear backstory that is shown to us in a very unique way, in some cases at least. The cinematography is also good as well. The only thing that I could say that affected the flow of the film is the flashbacks. For the most part, it didn't affect the film all that much, but the third act does a flashback in the middle of the action, and it did break the flow. It isn't too clever of a film at times, but it's still pretty cool to have noticed it. There is enough subtext here that it makes it feel like a clever film, and to go in depth would require spoilers, so I won't go into it at this time. In the end, Bad Times at the El Royale is a fun thriller with a lot of great elements infused into it. It isn't a perfect movie by any means, but it is a fun time at the movies. Bad Times at the El Royale gets an A-.